I'm Nicky Miklos, and this is the Smart Business Growth Podcast, where we ditch the busy trap and get real about what it takes to drive sustainable sales, lead with clarity, and build a business that's future fit. Let's dive straight into it. Hello. It is so wonderful to be here with you again this week. And I got to say, I have missed you and I've missed having this conversation because we did have a break about a fortnight. We've only released a couple of podcast episodes this month. But really, it gets me thinking about having these conversations with you, even though they're one-sided, are really important because every topic that I talk about is actually relatable to what is happening at the moment in the market. When I have an idea of what I'm going to share in the podcast episode, and today we're going to talk about tough conversations, how to have tough conversations, but I really think about what are the conversations I'm having with clients at the moment? What's the feedback that I'm getting from those conversations? What am I seeing in terms of some of the challenges that clients or people in my community are facing when it comes to sales and or leadership? Really, when it comes to smart business growth, what are the topics that we need to touch on to help remove some of those barriers? The last couple of weeks in particular, in conversations or workshops that I'm running or conversations with business owners and leaders around how to have those tough conversations. What is a tough conversation? So it could be an awkward conversation that we need to have. It might be around somebody's personal hygiene or presentation. Awkward. Nobody loves having these kinds of conversations, but they're important and we have to have them. The more common type of tough conversation would be, say, an accountability conversation. Last episode, I talked about KPIs. I talked about benchmarks of success and how important they are in order to be able to drive and ride the business to the outcomes that you want. So accountability conversations are a classic tough conversation that people tend to avoid. Another example could be behaviour conversations. So typically tough or accountability conversations will fall into a behaviour. So could be adherence. They're late. They're not coming back from their lunch break, poor attitude, being rude to customers and clients. They're behaviours that we have to have a conversation around. Or they fall into performance. So again, that might be accountability around your KPIs, your bosses, not meeting expectations, not meeting goals. And what's really interesting is that our natural behavioral style will actually hold us back or help us move forward with these conversations. And in fact, each of our behavioral styles will have a strength and also a risk to keep in mind. We have to remember that there's a cost of avoidance. And there's different reasons that either you as a leader or business owner or your team, if they're leaders, are holding themselves back or avoiding having that conversation. When we think about the cost of avoidance, for the individual, for your team member that you're avoiding having or your leaders are avoiding having the conversation with, they don't have the opportunity to improve, to implement the feedback that you give them to get better. So really, you're not setting them up for success if we don't have those conversations. And if you have a team of leaders that are having these conversations, I want you to think about how confident are you that these conversations are happening consistently. And then also think about what do you think could be holding that leader back? So the individual, the team member doesn't have a chance to right the wrong or correct or improve their behavior and their performance. It's also not great for the leader that's not having the conversation because, for one, it builds up in the head. So the stories begin to grow. When you avoid something, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then there's massive avoidance or hesitation, and it affects the conversation being had and potentially the quality of the conversation. And then half the time when you actually do that thing, you realize it wasn't even that big a deal. And so there's a cost to the leader internally. It's taking up space in their mind. But it also can have a cost to their credibility because guaranteed there's other people in your team on the floor or the coalface that are noticing that behavior or that performance. And it puts extra pressure on them. There could either be some resentment from the team, so the credibility of the leader that's avoiding the conversation is at risk, is impacted. Or the other way it can go is that team member goes, you know what? They're getting away with it. I'm going to get away with it too. And so they start to loosen their standards around performance and behavior as well. So there's additional risks from the leader point of view, the business point of view, and the individual team. So it's worth moving through the awkwardness and being okay with the awkwardness and the discomfort to have these conversations. So what I see are the reasons that people hold back. If they're naturally a more dominant, direct style, then their strength is they're okay having the conversation, but the risk is that they go too hard and fast, not with enough fact or evidence, and they can be too blunt. So they might actually break or impact the relationship in a negative way. It can be too harsh, the delivery. You or your leaders might be more of the influencer style, behavioral style. So a bit more of the entertainer archetype. It's all about experience and having a good time and making sure we're all along for the ride in terms of it's going to be a great experience working together, very, very briefly. Side note, if you want more information on these archetypes I'm talking about, just send me a DM on LinkedIn or email. So the hesitation there might be the biggest, I guess, fear for an influencer type energy is fear of rejection. So they're very, very conscious of the relationship and not wanting to hurt the relationship. Therefore, they might avoid it. Now, when they have it, the strength, so that's the risk, the strength that they have is that they are people like them. So they can actually do it in a way when they're smart about it and really conscious of it, that it doesn't hurt the relationship. And they can actually position it in quite an optimistic way and really have a good outcome from that conversation if they move through the fear of rejection or not being liked. We have another archetype that's more stability. They're more of a stable behavioral archetype or energy style. And they have a big fear of conflict. So again, there's the avoidance is really driven about not wanting to hurt somebody's feelings, but also they can get swept up in the emotion. So the risk factor is that if they do have that conversation, they're so swept up in the emotion of the other person, they forget the purpose, or they'll be like, that's okay, no problem. Let's not have this conversation because it feels too hard. So the anchor to the outcome of that tough conversation can be lost. The strength is they create a really safe space. They're the person that you are really number one, top of mind for them, that you are really taken care of by that archetype, that energy style. And then the fourth style, the strength is they're very analytical. They're very conscientious and compliant. So you know that they're going to be absolutely on board with the observational evidence or facts or stats. There will be evidence to support the feedback that's given. But the risk is this is the type of energy or thinking that will need the 35 different scenarios played out before they have the conversation. So that can actually stop them having the conversation. It can be very much around, I have to have every possible scenario planned out. And interestingly, I was just talking to a client of mine the other day about this exact thing. And he said, yes, I need to have 35 scenarios played out before I actually have the conversation. But what I'll say to you is that it might not always be necessary, and you can't map out every single scenario. The conversation is not necessarily or will ever be perfect because perfection doesn't exist. Instead, what we need to think of is how can I be really well prepared? What is enough prepared so the really driver dominant energies are preparing some, but then you don't fall into procrastination mode if you're highly analytical. A quick interruption to this podcast episode. I'm really curious, do you want to close more sales in less time? If the answer is yes, which I hope that it is, then you need to get your hands on the Growth Code. It is going to give you 3 proven frameworks and tools that will help future-proof your business and scale with clarity. All you have to do is head down to the show notes and click the link below. So we need to be prepared, but not over-prepared. We need to have a structure to fall back to that is the anchor so we don't get swept up in the other person's emotion. And we need to have that structure to stay on task and to give us the certainty and confidence that it's not personal. And when we have this conversation, it's not about attacking them or giving them feedback personally. It's about a business conversation. So I'd love to share with you what structure I share with my clients and that I use that will help really minimize the risks that we talked about and elevate the strengths that we talked about. Okay, so the name of this structure, this framework, is PACE, P-A-C-E. The P stands for prepare. Now, I want you to think about 5 things, no more, probably no less, but 5 things before you walk into a room and have the tough conversation, the awkward conversation, or the accountability conversation. Some of you may have heard of SBI, which is a classic leadership framework for feedback. Yeah. So, question number 1 is, what was the situation? When and where did it happen that you're giving feedback on? The second thing, the B, stands for behavior. What specifically was observed, or what was the behavior that needs to be changed? And I want you to think about, is this actually a change of pattern? Because if it's a change, that needs to be commented on. We need to get curious about what else is happening for that person. We then want to look at the I, impact. So that's the SBI model, but I'm going to build it out even more. So we're thinking of the situation, when and where did it happen, the behavior, what actually is the topic of conversation, the impact, what effect did it have either on the team, on clients, on the individual themselves. So we're pre-thinking the situation, the behavior, and the impact. But then I want you to think about, what does a successful conversation look like? What does success look like at the end of this conversation? Not overall, like you want to lift in performance, you want to improve behavior, absolutely. But I want you to think about success in this conversation. Is it buy-in? Is it awareness? Is it them realizing that their behavior needs to be improved? Because yes, we have to have the overarching outcome, but this is really helpful to not get swept up in the emotion of the other person, or to get sidetracked or deflect. Because the person might deflect. They're going to use every strategy possible to get us off track in some instances. And so this is important to think, what does success look like from this conversation? And then the 5th thing to think about is, get curious about, how am I, as in you, how am I showing up? Is there some avoidance happening? And what is that? Why is that? Get curious about how you are showing up to that conversation. Do I feel like I'm rushing? Is there any ickiness about having this conversation? You also need to think about, have I had this conversation before? So we're looking at situation, behavior, the impact. Within that, is this a change of behavior for them? And is this actually the first, second, third conversation about this thing, about this topic? Set your intent for the conversation. And then check in with some curiosity around, how am I feeling about this? What do I need to do to be able to show up nice and present? So all of that is within P, and that's all the prep you need. You don't have to think of all the million different scenarios. When we move to the A is all about addressing it. You've done the pre-work. You've thought about, by the way, that pre-work might take 5 minutes, unless you've got to wait for dashboards and reports. But don't fall into the rabbit hole of overthinking. So for address, you name it. You actually say it. So use SBI, name the situation, the behavior, the impact. And then what I want you to do is add a transition question. So you're adding a question. You're using your SBI plus a question. And that's how we address it. It's simple because you've done the pre-work, and this is where the guts of the conversation sits. Now, some of the questions might be that you at the end, so you've shared the impact, the situation, behavior, impact, and it could be around, help me understand what was going on for you, as an example, or I'd like to hear your side of this, or walk me through what's happening from your perspective. Now, if it's a second or third, or you've had this conversation before, I would check in with, what was the goals that were already set? What stopped you from seeing through on the commitment that you previously made? Would be the question. Remember, this is all before a performance improvement plan. That's a different conversation. What we're trying to do here is understand what's driving the behavior, so you know what to really work with in order to help that person, that team member, change their behavior and get the results and lift the improvement of performance and behavior. Now, if it's something that is really fundamentally not on, you can also ask a more pointed question. Remember, you're just asking one. You're choosing one of these. The more pointy question could be something like, do you think this is appropriate behavior? Notice it's a closed question, because I need them to understand, and I need them to get agreement on, is it appropriate behavior, or does this align with our values? Or if you want to open it up, how do you think this behavior aligns with our values? And we want to get them to say, well, actually it doesn't, or maybe they think that it does. We've got to have that opportunity to see where they're coming from so we can build from there. Too often we just go straight into tell, and we're not actually giving the opportunity for them to set their own goals or actions from here, or to really share what stopped them, like what actually stopped them. Now, what they share with you, you're going to go into, you might use some more open questions if you're familiar with Grow. If you want templates around this, just flick me an email and I'll send it to you. But we want to ask some questions around what do options look like and what's next. And that's when we move into clarify. So C is for clarify. So we prepared the 5 key things. We addressed it. We named it SBI and we asked a question to open up the conversation. You're now curious and exploring about what's driving this behavior, remembering that this is not performance management conversation. It's actually just a tough, awkward conversation on how can we help lift performance. And that's where we come into C, which is clarify. You've asked the question, so we need to listen to what they're sharing. And again, there's curiosity. And then we need to get clarity on what is the next step. What is their commitment to actually making a change? What is there? And ask them questions so they're setting their own goals. And that's where the option questions, what do you think you could do instead of X? Or how can you make sure that you're able to, start your shift on time? What are the options? Who else is successful in this? Maybe not the rocking up on time early, but it might be different skill related or will related. So we're asking questions. Then we're getting clarity on what the next step is and getting them to set that where possible. They might say, yes, this is what I can do. And then the E is establish. So we agree, we close the loop with an agreement and be specific. So by this date, I need to see this behavior because you've already done the clarify point where they've said, this is what I can do to improve. Then you're saying, great, by this date, this improvement, and we lock it in. So you're getting the establish is establishing that next step. You're locking in what the agreement was and you're putting things in the calendar if necessary. If you follow this formula, if you have to have conversation number 2, your preparation incorporates, we've had this conversation. The addressing it is the SBI and the question might be more direct, or the conversation might start being more direct as opposed to more open. We're going to tell a little bit more than ask. But if it's the first time you're having a conversation, a tough conversation about accountability conversations, behavioral issues, performance, assuming that it's not HR crisis, that's a different thing, then, bring that curiosity and give them an opportunity to also come to the party with what's stopping them, what's driving that behavior, and what they can do instead. And then establish that next follow-up date and touch base with them. Let me know if you've got any questions on this. And again, if you want that handout, just shoot me an email and I'll flick that out to you. Take yourself lightly with this, but also make sure, really reflect on the beginning of this conversation. What was my natural strength, and just feel it out based on what I said. What do you think your natural strength is? And what do you think your natural risk is? Use the PACE framework to make sure those conversations are happening, whether it's you having them directly yourself or your team are having them. You're going to be prepared. You're going to address it. You're going to clarify what that team member can do to overcome and improve. And then you're going to establish the next step. I love your work. And I can't wait to hear how you go with this. And I'll see you next time.